was researching this, I spent a lot of time thinking about how we all experience loneliness at times in our lives and how it can have such a significant impact on us in terms of how we think, feel, and act. Having all just lived through the COVID-19 pandemic over the past few years, I think that has really thrown up loneliness in a stark fashion. Feeling alone and isolated is something all people, as social creatures, really can fear at times, and this can really impact on our mood. It also impacts on other areas of our lives, such as our physical health. However, it is not possible to cover all the various areas we could discuss today, so I'm just going to include some thoughts on some areas that tend to contribute to people feeling lonely and depressed. I really like this quote from a young Twitter or X user as it may be called now. Having anxiety and depression is like being scared and tired at the same time. It's the fear of failure, but no urge to be productive. It's wanting friends, but hate socializing. It's wanting to be alone, but not wanting to be lonely. It's feeling everything at once, then feeling paralyzingly numb. I think this really encapsulates what it's like to feel stuck and weighed down with depression and anxiety, and how it affects so many different parts of our lives. There's a vast array of literature out there on depression, and an equally large body of work on loneliness, and therefore that means this talk will not and cannot be exhaustive, and it might bring up more questions than answers. However, I hope that it will all result in us all thinking a bit more deeply about our own experiences of low mood and loneliness, and how it can also affect other people around us. I'll begin by reflecting on what I mean by depression and the symptoms associated with it. Then I'd like to look at the concept of loneliness, what it is, how it can occur, and how it impacts our mental and physical health. I'd like to reflect on how loneliness and depression are linked to each other and how both can create an environment in which the other thrives. Finally, I'd like to spend some time looking at the ways we can help reduce feelings of loneliness and thus reduce our vulnerability to becoming depressed. So when we talk about depression, lots of people have different experiences of this. But these are some of the criteria that are used for diagnosis of depression. Feelings of sadness, increased self-critical thinking, lack of motivation, lack of pleasure in previously loved activities, feeling hopeless and helpless, increased feelings of fatigue, feelings of guilt and shame, increased tearfulness, low self-esteem, thoughts of suicide, feeling alone and isolated. Everyone can experience some of these symptoms at different times and in differing levels of severity. 12% of the Irish population struggle with chronic depression, and this has been seen in several studies over the years. Slightly more women than men experience depression, and it is likely that about 20% of people around the world will be affected by depression at some point in their lives. As I said, women, along with those from a lower socioeconomic background and those from conflict-affected and developing countries, are more likely to be affected by depression, as well as those aged between 15 and 25. It can tend to follow a remitting, relapsing course, with 25 to 50% of those who've experienced one episode of depression relapsing within 18 months. It's seen as a complex interplay between genes and environment, as opposed to being solely biological in nature. Research shows that a number of key life events commonly precede depression: divorce, bereavement, retirement, loss in general. And as we can see here, one of the key features of depression is feeling alone and isolated. Social isolation has been found to be a common outcome of mental health difficulties. It is found in various mental health conditions such as stress, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and of course, depression. Research shows that an absence of social relationships is at the very heart of depression, with social isolation being seen as a key risk factor for developing depression across all ages, genders, and socioeconomic backgrounds. An increase in loneliness and the accompanying social withdrawal has been found to precede rather than follow the development of depression in some studies. And that brings us to the age-old question, which came first? As we can see in this cartoon here, it also applies to the question of depression and loneliness. In some cases, as a person's mood lowers, they tend to withdraw from social engagement and begin to feel increasingly isolated or lonely as a result. However, in other cases, people find themselves feeling lonely and isolated, perhaps due to a significant lifestyle change, such as moving house, retiring, and so forth. And this lack of social contact can result in them experiencing a drop in their mood, which may result in them feeling depressed if it continues for an extended period. While we are aware that significant lifestyle changes can result in people feeling lonely, what is less understood is how smaller, subtler changes in a person's circumstances can conspire to make them feel lonely. When we look at definitions for loneliness, Collins English Dictionary defines it as the unhappiness that is felt by someone because they do not have any friends or do not have anyone to talk to. I think these two quotes here, "Everybody hurts sometimes," from R.E.M., and "Loneliness comes with life," which is from Whitney Houston, sum up the ubiquity of the feeling of loneliness and how pervasive it can be. Whitney Houston's quote in particular strikes me as very poignant given her sad and tragic death. The sense of resignation that permeates through that simple sentence is somewhat heartbreaking to read. There is an irony in loneliness. Because everyone feels it, it shows that we are not alone. I don't know who that quote is from, although I did try to find it, but I think it's a really true statement. We all understand the concept of loneliness, and no doubt we have all felt this way at one point in our lives, particularly if we think back over the past few years during the pandemic. It is something that people can find very uncomfortable, as we tend to strive for a connection with other people. We are, by nature, social animals. There is a difference between feeling lonely and wanting to be alone. In the latter, it is a choice we are making to take time for ourselves and sit with our own feelings and thoughts. We can control we feel in control and that we have a choice to take this time for ourselves. However, in the former, feeling lonely, it is something that we feel is outside of our control. We feel powerless and isolated, and this can result in heightened feelings of anxiety, lowered mood, and catastrophic thinking. This was something that became starkly clear during the COVID-19 pandemic. During this time, people across all age groups, young and old, were shown to be experiencing increasing levels of loneliness, and as a consequence, were experiencing more mental health problems, including depression. In some cases, people endorsing higher levels of loneliness during this time were 14 times more likely to suffer from depression and 11 times more likely to experience anxiety. Loneliness is a global phenomenon. Wherever there are people, it is experienced. These next few slides are going to explore perceptions about loneliness in various countries and cultures. Here are some statistics in relation to loneliness in the USA, UK, and Japan. So as we can see here, the percentage of people saying that they always felt lonely was over 20% in the USA and the UK, and slightly less than 10% in Japan. About 5% of those surveyed across all 3 countries stated that they saw it as a major problem. Moving to Australia, we can see that this sense of isolation and loneliness is also evident there. In a study done in Australia, 1 in 4 Australian adults cited loneliness as a problem. 1 in 2 Australians reported feeling lonely for at least a day in the week previous to doing the survey. 1 in 4 felt lonely for 3 or more days. Just over 1 in 2 Australians felt they lacked companionship at least sometimes. 1 in 2 Australians sometimes or always feel alone. 1 in 3 never or rarely feel part of a group of friends. 1 in 4 don't feel they have a lot in common with people around them. 1 in 5 rarely or never feel close to people, rarely or never feel they have someone to talk to, and don't feel they have people they can turn to. If we bring this closer to home, we can see the huge impact that loneliness has in the UK. So there are 2 separate sets of statistics on this. There's the ones that are in the black circles, and the other ones. So I'm just going to read through them. 92% of people surveyed find it difficult to tell others that they felt lonely. 7 in 10 people surveyed knew a friend who was lonely. 8 out of 10 felt judged negatively for feeling lonely. 2 in 3 people knew someone who was lonely. 92% of the people surveyed think people are scared to admit they are lonely. 1 million people aged 65 or over in the UK are always or often feeling lonely. 33% of people believe others think there's something wrong with them. 1 out of 4 UK citizens know a parent who is lonely. And 13% of them feel lonely all the time. It's worth noting that loneliness seems to have a significant impact on physical health as well as mental health. And these black circles talk about the physical difficulties. So loneliness is seen in this survey as worse for people than obesity. Lonely people are 54% more likely to develop dementia. Lonely people are more likely to develop depression. This one is really shocking. Loneliness is a comparable health risk to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And lonely people are more likely to develop heart disease. Bringing this right home now, let's look at how loneliness affects people in Ireland. So this image here was from the latest set of statistics from the Central Statistics Office that I could find, which was done during the middle of the pandemic. And as you can see over here, these last 2 here, 16.9% of women reported feeling lonely all or most of the time when this survey was done, compared with 9.2% of men. More recent information comes from various other surveys, including a survey by AXA, which was carried out in 2022 with over 2,000 participants in Ireland, aged between 18 and 74. And they found that this trend for loneliness in Ireland has continued post-pandemic, when it found that 60% of males and 67% of females surveyed felt lonely in the weeks leading up to taking the survey. TILDA, the Irish Longitudinal Study on Ageing, has also explored this amongst older adults, and they have found that in a population of 8,500 participants, 1 in 3 adults over 50 in Ireland report feeling lonely at least some of the time. And this was most prevalent amongst those over 75 and those living alone. 3/4 of the most lonely cohort in that study showed depressive symptoms, and this data is from 2019. There's an awareness in Ireland about the difficulties of loneliness that's been going on for a number of years. So much so that in 2018, the Loneliness Task Force was created and chaired by Dr. Keith Swanwick and Sean Moynihan from the charity Alone. I will go into some of the recommendations that they came up with later in this talk. More recently, people have looked at the links between social media and feelings of loneliness. And a study done by Primark and Miller in 2017 showed that in a survey of 1,800 young adults, those who checked social media over 58 times per week reported feeling 3 times as lonely as those who checked less than 9 times per week. In Ireland, loneliness is seen in all age groups from the young to the old, with all being vulnerable to developing depressive symptoms as a result. Childline reports that one of the main reasons cited by children for contacting their service is loneliness. A study in Belfast found that loneliness was highest amongst those who were separated or divorced, and lowest for those who were single. It was found that experiencing a relationship breakdown contributed to people feeling lonely and isolated. Research has also found that successful business people often experience loneliness and a sense of isolation for a variety of reasons, including the level of sacrifice they make to rise through the ranks. First one in the office, last one out, available to meet at the drop of a hat. Once they reach their goals, their worlds can diverge from those of their peers, either through reduced social contact due to increased working hours, or through a sense of social divide, differing social status that success and increased financial gain can bring. In summary, loneliness affects Irish people of all ages, genders, all walks of life. Everyone is vulnerable to loneliness. And when we look at this, there is consistent evidence that loneliness not only affects our mental health, but it can also impact on our physical health. There is evidence that it can cause physical pain, increase stress, and lower the immune system. A recent study also shows that experiencing social isolation can result in feelings of fatigue similar to those experienced by someone suffering from food deprivation. So this furthers the suggestion that social contact is a basic need of people and can have direct effects on our physical as well as our mental health. And this was done as a lab study and a field study, and both found similar results. There's also consistent evidence that social connection releases oxytocin. Ox reduces stress, reactivity, and it increases tolerance for discomfort, and it improves attention and decision making. It's a hormone that's produced naturally in the body, and it's released when we feel socially connected to others. This release of oxytocin subsequently triggers the release of serotonin, which activates the reward circuitry of the brain, resulting in a person feeling happy. So this shows that there is a direct causal link between feeling socially connected to others and feeling happy. Looking further at the neuroscience about the impact of loneliness on mental health, this is an MRI image of the human brain reacting to an experience of social exclusion. This portion of the brain here, there, the anterior cingulate cortex, is the same area of the brain that is affected due to physical pain. So what we're seeing here is that experiences of social exclusion and the resultant feelings of loneliness and disconnection that are created by it are similar to the reaction we would have when we experience physical pain. To be isolated and excluded is in essence similar to experiencing severe discomfort and pain. This is an MRI image of the human brain reacting to social connection, the highlighted pieces in yellow. This portion of the brain is the orbitofrontal area, and it's associated with planning, reasoning, and decision making. What this indicates is that feeling socially connected is linked to our ability to think and reason in a clear fashion. It is associated with the area of our brain that involves our ability to plan and make decisions. Loneliness is like hunger. It tells us something important. that there's something inside us we need to feed. We need to be aware when we feel lonely. It's an indicator that something is missing and that we are lacking in something. Like when we experience physical pain or hunger, it is our body's way of telling us that something is wrong or missing, so that we can make appropriate plans and decisions to address it. So treatments can often be successful in treating symptoms, yet it is not unusual for individuals to still experience social difficulties. So as I've already discussed, loneliness is associated with a variety of mental health conditions, including depression. Whilst we can treat the symptoms of depression effectively, many will still experience social difficulties. The concerns raised in the world in recent years about loneliness have been discussed in previous slides. It is a pervasive worldwide problem, likely exacerbated over the past few years by the COVID-19 pandemic and the enforcement of self-isolation. In Ireland, a number of different charities and government officials have taken a keen interest in this area in recent years, and this includes the establishment of the Loneliness Task Force, which I mentioned earlier. In 2018, they made the following recommendations to government. Annual funding of €3 million towards combating loneliness. Allocation of a responsibility for combating loneliness to a specific minister and government department. A public campaign to raise awareness of the issue of loneliness and ways to manage it. Support for initiatives and organisations which alleviate loneliness as their primary function, and an action plan for volunteering. They also requested that there be more Ireland-specific research on loneliness, as a lot of what we know comes from other countries in the world, as we have previously seen. However, unfortunately, since the time that this report was published, the world went through the turmoil of the pandemic. And it would appear that 5 years on, a lot of those recommendations have yet to be enacted. When we feel lonely, we try to protect ourselves. We withdraw. Our confidence goes down. It is harder to have confidence to do something new or go back to something old. This infographic comes from the same study that explored Australian experience of loneliness that was discussed earlier. So as we can see here, loneliness increases the likelihood of experiencing depression by 15.2%. Being depressed increases the likelihood of being lonely by 10.6%. Loneliness increases the likelihood of experiencing social interaction anxiety by 13.1%. Being anxious about social interactions increases the likelihood of being lonely by 8.6%. Isolation has been found to increase the risk of relapse in depression, psychosis, bipolar disorder, and anxiety. There are few treatments for isolation and loneliness. So whilst there are lots of effective treatment options for depression in the form of antidepressant medication and various psychological therapies such as CBT, there are a few treatment options for addressing social isolation and loneliness. This is despite the fact that, as we've been discovering through the last number of slides, these are strong precipitants and consequences for someone experiencing depression, and also increase the risk of relapsing into a depressive state. So having discussed the links between depression and loneliness and the very serious consequences that the latter can have for people's physical and mental health, I now want to begin to explore ways in which we can help to alleviate feelings of loneliness and thereby reduce people's vulnerability to depression. In order to do so, I want to first talk a little bit about social identity theory. Social identity refers to the sense of self that people derive from their membership in social groups. Groups make life worth living, and they are what we live for. As we have already discussed, being socially isolated affects our mental and physical health in various adverse ways. We need social interaction in order to develop a sense of self. A sense of belonging to a group is essential for us to thrive. Therefore, when we feel alone and isolated, this can have a negative impact on our mental and physical health. Losing a group membership can lead to feelings of depression and anxiety. Research has shown that it is not the frequency of contact, but rather the quality of that contact that is important. In addition, it has been found that the more social identities someone has, the more psychological resources they have to draw on, and the more beneficial this is for their mental health, within reason. We don't want to spread ourselves too thin, as this diminishes the quality of the social contacts. But somewhere in the region of 3 groups we identify with as a member is ideal in terms of supporting our mental and physical health. Being in a group gives us a sense of connection and positive orientation to others, a sense of meaning and purpose and worth, access to effective social support, and a sense of control, efficacy, and power. There are different aspects to our sense of self, including the personal self, social self, and collective self. The personal self refers to our view of ourselves as an individual. We are motivated by our own interests and compare ourselves to others around us to help us identify as different and unique. The social self refers to how we view ourselves in relation to other people and the different roles we play. This self is integrated in relationships with others, and these can provide motivation and influence the decisions we make in different aspects of our lives. Some of these roles can include partner, wife, friend, daughter, mother, employer, and so forth. The collective self thinks of us as part of a group and is connected to multiple other people in this frame of reference. This can include our nationality, a sport we play or follow, our work. It is this aspect of our self-identity that social identity theory is most concerned with, and it is the aspect of self that needs to be nurtured in order to reduce feelings of loneliness and isolation. Being part of a group and having that sense of connection to others is, as I've discussed already, vital to our well-being. Research has indicated that social relationships counteract depression when they inform a person's self-concept or sense of self. Not all social relationships are created equal. They are interpreted through a lens of self-categorization. We understand ourselves not only on the basis of what makes us unique or different from others, but on the basis of what we have in common with others. It is only when people's memberships of groups inform their sense of self that these relationships have an implication for their well-being. In other words, these relationships need to be meaningful for them in order for them to have an impact on the person's mental health. Research by Cruz et al. In 2013 has shown that joining social groups decreases the likelihood of a person experiencing a first episode of depression, so it can be preventative. Even more importantly, though, the same study shows that the benefit of joining a group was 3 times as pronounced amongst those with a history of depression, in that it reduced the risk of relapse from 41 to 31% if that person joined just one group. However, those joining 3 groups reduced their risk of relapsing into depression to 15%. The stronger the sense of belonging, the lower the risk of depression relapse. And the effects are cumulative with membership of multiple groups, within reason. Social connection gives us a sense of tribal connection and a sense of purpose. Social identities counteract depression because they are a basis for meaning, agency, purpose, and support. Being part of a group gives us a personal sense of control over our lives. Being part of a group is linked to satisfaction in relation to esteem, sense of belonging, meaning, and support in our lives. We are less likely to make negative attributions about ourselves, which reduces the risk of depression. There is the danger that self-identifying as depressed can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, strength of identification with the group is key. It has to be meaningful to someone for them to benefit from it. This is more important than the type of group or the frequency with which they interact with the group or attend meetings. So, how can we go about reducing loneliness and thus reducing vulnerability to depression? Kachopa and Patrick suggested that we ease into it. Kachopa was a leading social neuroscientist and psychologist who did groundbreaking work in the area of loneliness in the early 2000s and the 2010s. And a lot of his findings are perhaps of even more relevance today. EASE stands for Extend, Action Plan, Selection, and Expect the Best. When we talk about extend yourself, so the withdrawal associated with loneliness comes from a sense of being threatened. To overcome that, we need to gradually and compassionately extend ourselves out into the world to connect with others. Ask yourself, what is the smallest step I can take? When we think about everyone, particularly young people, there's lots of suggestions out there for how people can extend themselves to reduce their sense of burnout. Spunout.ie, which is a website devoted to younger people with mental health difficulties, has suggested some of the following things, and I think these are applicable for almost everyone. Using relaxation techniques to become comfortable spending time by yourself, as this normalizes the situation and reduces your anxiety. The use of small talk in everyday situations. What Irish person can't spend a few minutes talking about the weather? Joining clubs, societies, and volunteering. Reaching out to friends rather than waiting for them to contact you. And seeking professional support if needed. A is for action plan. So we often want to do something, but to achieve it, we need to make a plan. We need to have small, consistent steps to take us in the direction we want to go. Having a plan, and most importantly, following through on it, is key for ensuring that this does not just remain aspirational, but rather gives us tangible goals to achieve. So, as we'll see from the following slides, putting a bit of thought into these steps and planning is key. It also reduces the likelihood that you'll become overwhelmed, which may lead to increased self-critical thinking and lower a person's mood. This may then result in the person giving up before they've even started. S is for selection. We have to select our goals. The solution to loneliness is not the quantity of relationships, as we discussed already, but the quality. Who do you know? What do you like? We don't want to scatter ourselves too thin, so it's important to focus on the quality of the relationships. So as I said before, being invested in 3 different groups appears to be a happy medium for most and is manageable both mentally and physically. So when we start planning, the first thing to think about is, who do you already know in your social network? Family, friends, neighbours, work colleagues, and so forth. I'd suggest writing a list or using a diagram format, as I'll show in another slide, to map out the people in your social circles, with those you feel most connected to or feel would be easier to contact being the ones to focus on connecting with first. We also need to think about what we like. There is no point in us deciding to join a football club if we can't stand football or we can't play because we have an injury or some other reason. So you need to brainstorm the options that are available and maybe think back to when we were younger and look at hobbies that we've given up or things we thought about trying but we never got around to. And this is something that I've seen happen time and time again with clients that I work with. And one client in particular comes to mind. This is a person I worked with several years ago. And they, through various reasons, had become very socially isolated and really were quite determined to turn that around to improve their mood. So they had kind of let go of a lot of their hobbies over the years. So we decided that they would start working on trying new things and seeing what stuck. They tried so many things: photography, art classes, so many sports. and nothing ever really seemed to land. So one day they came in and we had a rule that they'd try something 3 times, and if they didn't like it, they could quit at that stage. And they came in and they had tried archery. That wasn't really working out for them either. And again, here's me racking my brains going, what are we going to come up with next? We're running low. And they mentioned that whilst they were at the place where the archery was, there was someone who was doing falconry. For those of you, like me, who don't know what that is, it's essentially where you have these beautiful falcons that sit on your arm and they fly away and they come back. I'm not sure what it was about this that they felt so taken with, but they seemed really intrigued. So they went back, and they went back again, and they kept going back. And within a few months, they had signed up for membership of the club. And within a few more months of that, they had gotten interested in the idea of breeding their own falcons. To the best of my knowledge, they're still involved in that now. The point I'm making is that there is something out there for everyone. You just have to keep looking. Talking back again about the map idea. So this is just an example which comes from the Social Identity Network website. And this is just to help us visualize the people that we already know and have access to. So it helps us to see the different social groups that are available to us, and helps us plan how we can increase the contacts with people who are already in our lives, and also to look at how we can develop new interests and strengthen these. So it's a good website to have a look at if you ever have time. Volunteering, I mentioned this earlier, it's a really great way to be social. And there's evidence that many groups run by volunteers in Ireland, such as the GAA, Meals on Wheels, Tidy Towns, can actually help alleviate loneliness for the volunteers as a side effect of their actual remit. Volunteering is associated with increased feelings of self-confidence and better interpersonal skills. Actively participating in your community for more than 2 hours per week can alleviate loneliness for volunteers as well as the people they support. There's also significant evidence that befriending initiatives, such as those like Alone, can actually help to alleviate the loneliness and the depressive symptoms of not only the older adults, but also that of the volunteers. What about our online friendships? What about taking them offline and into the real world? So all those different friends we have online, but we rarely speak to for whatever reason. Making the time to invite one person per month to meet up can help to get the ball rolling. Most people are only too happy to meet up if someone else is taking the time to organise it. And if you're planning to meet old friends, whether people you talk to by phone or through social media, it's really important to put it in the diary. So similar, we need to make a plan. And we need to be specific about it, and we need to pin it down. So none of these "we must meet up soon" moments. We need to be precise. So make sure to name the date, the time, and location in advance. Follow-up messages in the interim are also useful in this regard, and not putting something in the diary that's too far away is really helpful, because if you leave it too long, nerves will build up and it makes it much easier to duck out of meeting the person. So act quickly and follow through. The last of our EASE acronym, expect the best. So this might be the hardest bit. To get good social connections, we have to be optimistic that the relationship will be good, that our outcome will be positive. People from all walks of life can feel vulnerable socially. Given the tendency for depression to be associated with pessimistic and negative thoughts, it is important to actively challenge those thoughts and to keep an open mind. Approaching these meetings and groups with curiosity can help us in this regard, as if you ever stop to think about it, it's very hard to be curious and another emotion such as anxious or sad at the same time. We also need to give things a go before deciding it's not for us or to give up. So as I said earlier, I generally would recommend trying something new at least 3 times to ensure that it really isn't for you, and not to overly rely on first impressions, which, as we all know, can be really deceiving. There are lots of supports available out there for anyone who struggles with loneliness and mental health difficulties. And these include professional supports, so seeing a mental health professional, where the person can receive support and a safe space to discuss some of their concerns with a qualified professional who acts as a sounding board, but also offers vital feedback in a neutral and helpful way. There's also peer support from others in similar positions and having similar challenges. Having a confidant, someone you can confide in, whether it's a partner, a sibling, or someone who you know who's not involved in the group in question, can be very helpful. And journaling is also a useful thing that we can do. Writing about events that trouble us can help us to resolve unfinished problems. It can help us to stop constantly thinking about a multitude of outstanding issues and refocus the mind on just one issue. It helps us to process our thoughts, clear our minds, and promote self-understanding. One of the things that comes up time and time again for people who are struggling with loneliness and depression is increased self-critical thinking. They are inextricably linked, and one feeds the other. People who are lonely often compare themselves negatively to others around them, and this can result in a further deterioration in their mood. People often think it is their fault that they feel this way, or that they shouldn't feel like that. But such thinking doesn't motivate us to try and change things. In fact, it has the opposite effect. So we need to work hard to be compassionate towards ourselves when we are feeling lonely, and realise, as I've said during this talk earlier, we are not the only person who is struggling with these feelings. This slide suggests a few ways that we can become more self-compassionate. Firstly, we need to be more mindful of how we're feeling and check in with ourselves to monitor self-critical thinking, which will negatively impact on our mood and thus create a vicious cycle. Self-criticism leading to lower mood, leading to more self-critical thinking, further lowering our mood, and so on. So this is where having a daily reflection or mood check-in with yourself is very helpful, as it increases your awareness of how you're feeling and how that might affect how you act. Self-kindness. So by being kind to yourself and validating or celebrating the little achievements along the way, it becomes so much easier to keep going, particularly when you feel like you're hitting a wall. So when you're reflecting on your progress with a goal for reducing loneliness, make sure to write down at least 3 to 5 positive achievements you've had that day or week on your journey to obtaining it. I promise it'll help keep the motivation to engage more socially, and it will also help you particularly during the harder times. Then lastly, try speaking to yourself about your achievements in the way you would speak to someone you love to encourage them when they feel stuck. We are great at cheerleading others, but we're not so good at always doing it for ourselves. So remember, everyone makes mistakes and struggles at times. We can all experience setbacks in our journey towards being more socially connected. So here we can see a beautiful, serene swan. Elegant, gorgeous, all very calm on the surface. But underneath, the legs are paddling madly. We often get very caught up in what we can see in front of us of other people's lives without realising that maybe other things are going on that we don't know about. We can get very hard on ourselves in comparison making to other people, and we get over-focused on how well other people are doing. But the reality is we don't know how things are going for other people, how they're coping. Behind closed doors, other people might also be struggling. So it's better to focus on your own goals and targets rather than trying to judge yourself against others. By only seeing that serene swan on the surface and interpreting that to mean the other person's doing so well at the moment, it can result in self-critical thinking kicking in, and then the motivation to work on our problems and loneliness going out the window. Also, I previously talked about using social media to reconnect with people earlier, and I just want to remind everyone that it's really important to take what you see online with a pinch of salt. The majority of people appear to be living their best lives from the information we see on social media, but we never really know what's going on in the background. Most people don't tend to post about the challenges they're facing online, so what we see on these platforms is not necessarily an accurate picture. Therefore, try not to compare yourself with what you see of other people's lives online. We never really know exactly what's going on with someone unless we speak to them directly. One other thing I just want to mention briefly as I come towards the end of my talk is the concept of social prescribing. Social prescribing is a relatively new phenomenon whereby GPs and other primary healthcare professionals and mental health professionals can refer people to a range of local, non-clinical services. So the idea here is for a link worker to work with people to access local sources of support in a variety of areas such as physical activity, reading groups, men's sheds, women's sheds, community art projects, and so forth. It's for those aged 18 and older, and there are a number of different projects running in different parts of the country at present, and it's growing all the time. When I previously looked at this information in 2020, there was maybe 3 or 4 pilot projects. When I looked at this a few months ago, there were tons of them around the country. There's a website, allirelandsocialprescribing.ie, so ALL, Ireland, socialprescribing.ie, and this has details of all the services that are currently available in the various parts of Ireland. What happens with social prescribing is that your GP, public health nurse, or even yourself in some cases, can be referred to the social prescribing coordinator, and they will then discuss the person's needs and look at the various options available. Some services in Ireland can self-refer, others it has to come from a professional. If you look at the website, you'll see more details. When a person goes to this service, they begin the activity that they choose, thinking that it may be the one that will suit them best, with an ongoing contact from the coordinator. The coordinator will meet with the person, monitor their progress, and discuss how the new activity is going, and if the person is interested in continuing it. If that one isn't working out, they can then look at other alternative options. So this is how we start out, an isolated individual with no connections to others. And I think it's important to emphasize that this can happen to anyone. Life can get really busy at times, particularly as we grow older and take on more responsibilities. Remember that as a child, it was easy to find opportunities to be social between school, playing on the local green, or being part of various clubs. But as we grow older, we end up having to prioritize other things such as work, family commitments, and our time and opportunities to engage socially with others diminish. This doesn't happen overnight, but it can be that one day we turn around and notice that all our old social connections are just that bit further out of reach than we realised. It's at points like that that loneliness can take hold, and we can become self-critical, as was just discussed previously. Therefore, it is really important not to blame ourselves for feeling lonely, and try instead to be compassionate to ourselves and begin to take steps to change this. Remember, everyone can feel lonely at times. But I hope that by engaging in the steps outlined in the previous slides and easing ourselves into it, that instead of feeling isolated, self-critical and depressed, people can increase their social connections and find a sense of meaning and purpose from it. Some societies that the Loneliness Task Force have been found to be instrumental in tackling loneliness and social isolation in Ireland include GAA, Tidy Towns, Macra na Feirme, No Names Club, Men's Sheds, there are now women's sheds too, Meals on Wheels, Sports Council, Feroiga, ICA, Alone. And there is also the Age Friendly Ireland initiative. This is a World Health Organization initiative to make cities friendly and amenable places for people to grow older. And Ireland was recognised as the first country in the world as age friendly by the WHO in 2019. There are so many options available to us. We just need to take the first step. So, I'm coming to the end of my talk now, and I would like to thank you for your time and your attention. We'll have some time in for questions in a moment, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm not sure that I'll have all the answers, but I'll do my best to answer them. But before that, I'm going to ask you to take a moment to think about your levels of social connectedness. Do you feel well connected socially with a number of different supports to draw from? Or do you feel somewhat isolated at present? What is one small change you could make, whatever way you view your social world at the moment, to increase your sense of social connection in the coming weeks? Because, as John Donne said, no man is an island entire of itself. Thank you.